Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community EU4 multiplayer. We're going to talk a little politics today, and as always, I'm joined by Brother Zale. Zale, welcome.
Hey man, thanks. Always thanks for having me.
So here we are, 1474, about 30 years in. Great powers, no tremendous surprises there. Any initial thoughts?
Um, I thought it was kind of funny that England was overtaken by Lithuania for a while, considering how man efficient, let's say, English are right now. Um, I like how AI kill was kind of expanded. I think that'd be a really nice place if we could find a player to slot in there. It's done pretty well for themselves and be a good balance for how things I think will play out in the future. Beyond that, I have to say I'm a little surprised with how Mordred Morales was talking about his little misplay. I would have expected a little bit more expansion, but if he was going to go on pirate and he made that misplay in the very beginning, it kind of makes sense. Um, it was a unique way of getting around it, selling land to the AI. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone doing that. And of course, we were just talking about this before we started, but the Usagi expansion, Eratos going full tilt over in Japan. I kind of expected that. It's a little bit more than what I was thinking, but it's about what I was thinking. But combined with how little Korea is expanded, I think that's sort of surprising to me. I don't know how closely they're working together or far apart, but I would have expected Korea to try to really expand a lot more into those horde lands.
He hasn't even had to fight his independence war yet, it looks like. It's still showing him as a vassal under Ashikaga. So, yeah, great session by Ratos. A little bit of expansion here in Korea into the northern horde lands, if you will, but relatively slow. Um, we'll see from a tech perspective, behind on admin, which is tough. Parity with Japan. If we compare dev, we've got 258 and 207, so there's still a semblance of balance between the two. Um, it'll be interesting to see. This is definitely a region to watch, I think. How did your expansion go for you? Obviously, Great Horde, unusual in multiplayer settings, but seems like you've grown a decent bit. I believe you're clocking in, yeah, right around 300 dev.
Yeah, I'd say the back half of the session went pretty well for me. The first half I got kind of C blocked by the AI pretty hard. Lithuania decided that it would be a good idea to guarantee the independence of Ryazan, who was also allied with Novgorod. I felt I could probably take one of those allies on, but not both, especially when Novgorod was supposedly helping Sweden in its independence war. And then Lithuania allied Muscovy, so that kind of, when I was just starting out and I was really small, it really made it sort of impossible for me to expand into the direction that would allow me to get feudalism earlier. Um, so I had to go for Crimea, and then I went for Nogai, and then I was finally able to go after those um, Eastern Europeans. But of course, that put me really far behind. I think I was just telling you that I had to take Miltech 4 at like 850 something mana cost, which hurt a lot. And I just got Renaissance like a year ago, combined with my wonderful rulers that I couldn't abdicate or disinherit. It's been not the best, but I'm pretty confident that starting next session I'll be able to have a really smooth sort of blooming of power. It also depends a lot on what my neighbors do, particularly Poland and the Timurids.
It's interesting you mentioned that. So it looks like there's some semblance of a hug box in between Poland, Hungary, Mamelukes. Obviously, you're on good terms with Poland. I believe you guys did a little bit of land transfer or core returning or something. Looks like you've drawn up some sort of boundaries. Do you see yourself more in conflict with the Timurids and whichever Indians may survive, or do you think there's still going to be conflict for you in Europe?
Um, as of right now, I do think that I'm going to have more conflict with the Timurids simply because Just Dutch has expressed a lot of interest into expanding northwards, particularly into his cultural lands of southern Uzbek. I tried to work out a deal with him, but he said that he didn't want to make a deal until later on when everything kind of simmered down. So I do think that there's going to be some sort of conflict there. He hasn't approached me with a deal as of yet, so I'm kind of still waiting on that. Especially as you see, he's pushing into the Mamluks territory, so that's plenty of incentive for Fizz to go after him, or maybe later on Milan, Italy, or Spain, someone who once has a vested interest in that area.
It seemed like Mamelukes and Timurids were working together at one point. That I believe they did a fake war. They also coordinated a war against Korkanulu. Do you think there's tension between the two, or what's your take
Yeah,
on that?
that's good. From just looking at it, I think that there's probably not. If just for the outside looking at it, I don't think there's a lot of tension. That's why I was mentioning Spain or Italy, because I think it's more reasonable at this point for people to expect that Jamie would try to get into Alexandria, and then that's when he would come into conflict with the Timurids down the road. Because if he owns Alexandria, he has an interest in wanting to take that trade from India. And Timmy, of course, would also have the interest of taking that trade, so they're going to have some competition there. Of course, this is assuming Fizz loses to Jamie, and assuming that Jamie wants to go after Alexandria. If Fizz managed to maintain control of Alexandria and resist any sort of European aggression, I think there's a significant chance that there won't be as much conflict, if any. Especially since he could go for Coromandel and then push that southwards, while Timmy could go for like the Gujarat node and Lahore and Doab and those areas.
Were you
So
surprised at all that the Mamelukes chose to expand into the Korkanulu, the Timurid, Basra area rather than pushing into the Gulf of Aden in Ethiopia with a little more force?
nah, not at all.
There's tremendous
I
value
know.
down in this area. From a
Yeah,
trade
I know
goods
that.
perspective, gold and grain is incredibly valuable. From a trade
If there was
perspective, it's easier to get to India through the Gulf of Aden rather than having to fight your way across Hormuz and Gujarat.
if there was a player in Kilwa or Ethiopia or something, I think Fizz probably would have played a lot different. I know he was pushing pretty hard to get like Hadramut and Yemen and stuff. Um, but since there's no player there, there's not as much need for him to go unless he's planning to like take colonial and cut off Europeans. Whereas if he gets an early foothold into the Basra node, like a serious foothold there, he has a lot more trade power that he can push or control Hormuz with. If he can control Hormuz better, he can control the Indian trade better and push it his direction. So I think it's long term, it's a pretty good play, especially if he has no real player rivals to the south. I don't really expect an AI Ethiopia to. I mean, it'll put up a decent fight, but it won't be enough to stop a Mamluks, especially with how strong those other Muslim nations are on the other side of them.
And before we get too far, I think we should touch briefly on India. We were talking about before we started recording. We have different views on the potential outcome of this war. Baha made a move, attacked Bengal. Bengal obviously was allied with Mewar. It looks like Timurids have shown themselves to be aligned with Mewar and Bengal, so Helena is finding themselves as the odd one out. What are your thoughts on this war moving forward? Right now, it looks like it's basically a draw, tilting slightly in favor of Bengal, but that's just due to holding a non-fort war goal.
Yeah. So I think if the status quo as it is continues, I think Bahmanis comes out on top, just because from an eco point, I think they survive a little bit, outlast Bengal, and they've done enough damage to Mewar at this point that even though Mewar hasn't taken out a lot of loans, they probably still wouldn't get the military to kind of recover and tilt the tides. It could be, but I think just in general, if you flip the coin, maybe like 6 or 7 out of 10 times it'll come up Bahmanis. But I think if Timmy gets involved with Bengal, I think that'll make it more likely that Bengal comes out with a victory. I was surprised. I didn't know that Bahman started the war. I thought it was Bengal or Mewar started, or Bengal, sorry. Started.
No, yeah, it's the Bahmani reconquest of this province using the Andara claims.
Okay. I mean that makes sense. especially since there was a. It was definitely sort of a peering hugboxy, though I have to say. Helena has kind of gone a little ham on the expansion there to the north. So
Yep, and they were able to ally with Jaunpur, pull them into the war initially. Obviously, they've been knocked out. Um, so I, I think Bengal, as long as they can hold out, they are running a heavy deficit. Um, they're
yeah, they only have
basically
three
at
loans.
max loans, but if Timurids gets involved, which they can send Condot within 12 months, I believe, um, December, yeah, within 12 months, Timurids can send those Condot. Baja is essentially out of manpower. Bengal is essentially out of manpower. Mewar is extremely out of manpower, but has not yet taken any loans. And once they retake a few of these sieges, their loan potential is quite high. It's going to be difficult for Baja to hold on. That's my take on the war. I see Bengal winning, but only time will tell.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting conflict for sure. Obviously, we have a couple of upcoming battles can really turn the tide one way or the other, especially with the amount of loans and eco drain they have. Having to reinforce your armies could cause serious problems, not just in the manpower pool, but also the finance pool. Could easily drop a nation from having, say, 5 years of loans left to only 2.5 years. They could feasibly fight. So it's going to be very interesting. And in the face of the amount of eco loss that they are facing, both Bakhmanis and Bengal, it's going to be kind of. I'm curious to see the effect that any sort of subs or anything
Yeah, it's a
will
crippling
actually
war
have.
on both sides, regardless. I think it's going to take, even if Bengal wins, they're in such a tremendous amount of debt. They will likely have to declare bankruptcy. Baja, obviously not there yet. They have plenty of room to run, but they are quite a bit over force limit. They're basically out of manpower. It's going to be difficult.
Hmm. And I think even with the oopsie, Majapahit is probably in a really good position to capitalize on this. They have, of course, their oopsies allowed Malacca and Ayutthaya and stuff to really kind of expand more than I'd imagine they'd have liked, but I think Morales can use his position, not a lot of the local rivals, to be able to really sort of expand quickly, especially if he goes after like Kutai and Brunei, the smaller ones first, and kind of consolidates power more. Um, while Bengal's trying to fight in this loan or fight in this war and paying off those loans and stuff, you're gonna have a lot of Majapahit ability to just expand, and hopefully he'll have the opportunity to get into Southeast Asia's Siam node and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting region to watch. I'm actually more excited for it now uh, with what we've seen than I was going into the session. Um, Pivoting over back to Europe now, Sweden was able to gain their independence. It was a costly war, didn't go as smoothly as possible, but looks like they're recovering now to some degree, just a little bit of debt. Um, they moved into the Novgorod node, which I'm not certain. Do you have a deal with Sweden? I'll ask you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're okay with their movement into Novgorod.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it doesn't bother me too much. I've never really been a big trade player. A lot of people can figure that out by now. So for me, them having Novgorod doesn't make too much of a difference, especially if I get the half of Novgorod I have. It'll, I have Muscovy in order to form Golden Horde. I'll have to take Yaroslavl, which is another um, center trade. Then of course I'll take the one in between those two because why not? So I'll own probably 50% or maybe closer to 30%, I'd say. And that's plenty of power for me to keep a significant amount of trade in my Astrakhan node. So, so for me, it doesn't matter too much, especially as I move more eastward, which is the likely event. I'll be able to push trade from China and Persia. Obviously, I imagine Timmy's not too happy with how much trade I'm pulling out of Persia right now, but um, Yeah, I think for me it's not that big a deal, and of course Europe would be perfectly happy with me drawing more trade in their direction. So I don't think Sweden or Poland has much um, economic incentive to try to break my stranglehold, because obviously if they weaken me, that just allows Timmy or Mamluks or someone else, Korea, to expand, and that means less trade coming their way.
So, you mentioned Poland and Sweden, obviously. Do you see any tension between the two as they compete over the Baltic and potentially Lubeck for trade dominance?
Um, I don't know. It's hard to say with Curb. He's a big meme. Um, he owns Danzig right now, which of course is typical, but I'm kind of surprised by that move. I would have expected Sweden to be given that if they were working together. And they might, he might integrate it and then sell the provinces to Sweden. In which case, I think that they'll work together just fine. Um, but if that doesn't happen, I think there will be a small amount of tension. I don't know that's going to be enough for them to not work together. But I will say that I was a little kind of rose my eyebrows a little when they maintained control over Danzig. But we'll see. We'll have to see.
And then as we shift further west in Europe, we've got a number of large nations forming. Hungary has done quite well for themselves, Croatia being underneath them, and Wallachia, Byzantium as well. The Byzantium claims, I'm assuming, will be exercised pretty shortly next week. Um, I assume Hungary and Mamluks will coordinate a takedown of the Ottomans. England had a very strong session, was able to grab Flanders, East Frisia, Scotland, dominating the British Isles. France, myself, decent session, nothing too impressive, but what you expect from a France, I would say. Um, Milan, good session by Jamie. Castile was able to fire the Iberian wedding at essentially the earliest possible date by killing his king very quickly and getting into a regency. Any surprises for you coming out of Western Europe?
Um, Two things. I'm a little surprised that Bavaria was able to form after that. The AI really went ham this session. I'm kind of surprised by that. So it was cool to see Slurfin stick around and pull that around for Mindboy. Milan, I think Jamie had a coalition. I can't remember, or was in danger of getting a coalition. So that was kind of interesting to see. Because I was kind of hoping that we would be able to do a war against Genoa, where he'd get the Italy stuff, and I could go after the Azov and Crimean stuff, which it looks like now the Ottomans are going to get. So that's unfortunate for me, but once Hungary and Mamluks dismantle Ottoman, it's not too bad. But Jamie's about where I expected Milan to be at this point. And then the thing that kind of interests me the most is, if I remember correctly, Sweden is allied with kind of minor powers all around Brunswick, but I know that they have a decent relationship, so it's kind of interesting to see that that's where he would go. Um, and I wonder what Brunswick was thinking about when that was happening.
Yeah, this
But
struck me almost as Sweden attempting to maintain alliances with anyone who would take it. Obviously, as you can see, very few people are willing to ally Sweden right now from an AI perspective, and I think they're just looking to maintain the upper hand in their relation with Denmark so that they can fight the wars on their terms rather than being um, pulled into a defensive war at a inopportune moment. But you're right. The one alliance that's most interesting is the one with Lüneburg, because Brunswick, obviously, in order to form Hanover, I believe needs the province of Lüneburg. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how long that lasts.
yeah, especially since, as far as I can tell, yeah, Brunswick is only allied with Saxony and Bavaria. And they do have that royal marriage with Burgundy, but it's kind of interesting that they didn't ally with Sweden, or that Sweden wasn't able. I mean, Curb's playing his own game, so it makes sense that Sweden didn't get that alliance with him. But Brunswick, at least, I would have figured would have wanted to ally with Sweden if they were planning to have good relations, which they do. And that would open up the opportunity for Sweden to drop that Lüneburg alliance and allow Brunswick to get in there. So I kind of expect that's going to happen early next session. But
Yeah, I think it's
Brunswick could not.
interesting with only two players in the HRE this season. Obviously, Bavaria got dealt one of the shittiest starts I've seen. For those of you who weren't aware, Bavaria started as Landshut. They quickly put Ingolstadt in a PU underneath them, but at the same time, Austria gave Ingolstadt a large amount of land, which skyrocketed Landshut's aggressive expansion, getting him coalitioned by the AI and forcing him to abandon his PU. He lost land to Munich, was down to two provinces, I believe, and had to claw his way back, but was able to get them under control and perform the tag swap. But unbelievable resilience by Slurfin. Great comeback. Very glad he didn't give up. And yeah, Mindboy, while a bit behind, still has a chance. Growth in the HRE is slow because of aggressive expansion, so he may still have a chance, slow and steady, to put together a pretty strong Bavarian nation.
Yeah, I'd like to see a repeat of, I guess it was 2 MPs ago, where the Bavaria player came kind of from behind and ended up being a pretty major power. And given that he is Martian and Jamie as his nearest player, I guess Brunswick as well, but Martian and Jamie have, pretty nice to other players when they're not ganking, ganking on Jamie at least. So I think the two of them will kind of let Mindboy. They won't go aggressively to stop Mindboy from having a comeback, essentially, which is a good thing. Um, Jamie has to focus on Italy, and Martian also has to focus on kind of the Ottomans. So there is an in-game incentive for letting Bavaria grow. And so I think, despite the rough start, Mindboy's actually in a pretty decent position now, especially considering there's no other players, just the two of them in the HRE. So it'll be kind of nice to see kind of how Mindboy expands if he decides to go a lot of the vassal route and that sort of thing, or if he can try to take the emperorship or something like that.
Yeah, I'd expect Austria to fall pretty soon. Um, I know personally I've got a vested interest in Provence, who, due to the AI screwing me and moving Provence's capital into the HRE, is now defended by Austria. I know Jamie most likely has an interest in the Tyrol gold mine, and then Hungary, obviously, in order to move forward in their mission tree, needs some Bohemian land, which would put them at conflict with Austria. This unlocks both their PU over Bohemia as well as their PU over Austria. So um, I don't expect Austria to be the emperor at the end of next session.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. And this might be spoilers, so sorry, Martian, but if I remember correctly, Martian said he wanted to go after those PUs.
Why
So it'll
wouldn't
be
you?
interesting.
If you've got him in the mission
Oh
tree,
yeah,
it's yeah.
oh yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of deal he works out with Jamie regarding, or Mindboy regarding that Tyrol gold mine, because I imagine neither one of them would be too keen to let Hungary just have Bohemia and Austria and both those gold mines for free. So I imagine one of them will probably end up with a pretty decent deal in a gold mine. And if I was them, I would certainly be talking about that. Especially when Hungary has a relatively, not even relatively, just a pretty weak Ottomans. Like, I'm fairly certain I alone and the Great Horde could take on the Ottomans right now. And him and Mamluk's gonna be splitting that. So
Oh, you might be a little overconfident there.
I don't know. The way the AI has been playing strategically in terms of their alliance and stuff has been pretty good this session, but I've noticed the individual battles and stuff they take have not been very smart. So if it was a player, definitely not, but against an AI, I'm somewhat confident. But yeah, that's we're talking about Hungary and Mamluks for sure. That's
Oh,
the
easily.
moral of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, Hungary and Mamluks. Yeah, Mamluks alone could probably beat them at this point. Great amount of manpower coming out of Fizz so far. He opened quality, which helps make up for the difference from the Ottoman tradition. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty easy war for Hungary and Mamluks. Anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to?
Yeah, real quick, I wanna talk about England as Panda slips into our chat. Real quick, Calais is still owned by the English.
Of course.
What's your thoughts about that?
So Calais has a specific bonus. The staple port doesn't make sense to transfer it. Um, One, England doesn't want to give it up. It's a center of trade, plus it has this bonus. It's not worth me as France trying to fight for it because he has so little land on the mainland. He can stay in the war indefinitely. Um, so I have no problem with Panda holding Calais.
Okay, that's interesting because they have a huge, if I remember correctly, they have a pretty decently sized coalition and rather large AE right now.
They
I was kind of
do.
surprised to see that you or Spain haven't kind of jumped on that because I feel like this is one of the few opportunities where, given the amount of those small HRE miners, like their navies and stuff, this is one of the few times where a Castile or a France actually could affect a decent invasion into England, and it's kind of surprising to me that you guys aren't.
So I have a non-aggression pact in place with England as part of the deal to get my cores with little pain. And then Castile does not have enough aggressive expansion to join the coalition, nor I believe they may also have an alliance between Castile and England at this point.
Hmm. Okay, I mean if you say that, it's not the first time you've betrayed an alliance. Cough, but yeah, hey, alright.
No, this wasn't. I don't have an alliance with either of them. It's an alliance between the two of them. So Castile wouldn't attack England.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the only kind of question I had about Western politics. It seems pretty much standard fare so far. I'm actually real quick. What is Castile's first idea?
I believe they opened Quant. Yeah.
Okay, so they're going for the more traditional Castile play. In that case, yeah, it's pretty much what I expected out of the players in Western Europe so far.
Have you seen
Moving.
Portugal